I get to talk about applying behavioral economics and psychology to the very immense problem of diversity and inclusion in organizations. But similar to all of the other ways we've been talking about applying behavioral economics, there's a real unseen opportunity in terms of how we can use this to improve businesses, including things like innovation and overall performance. Because, as you've probably seen these numbers, just as I have, there's immense data showing that increasing diversity, particularly at the top of organizations, leads to bottom line outcomes. It increases stock prices. I think I should be able to just stop there, right? If you could find one thing in your business that increased stock prices, I think most CEOs was like, okay, let's do that. And then you tell them, well, the one thing is having a female CEO, and then they're a lot less likely to want to do it. But here are just some stats. For every 1% increase in gender diversity and racial diversity, you get a 3 and 9% boost in sales. For every one team member who represents a larger target market, you're 158% times more likely to capture that market. If you have just one woman in the C-suite, you are going to have greater firm profitability. Yeah, that's right. And here's actually one of my favorite studies in the Journal of Financial Management. They looked at companies over time, which is really neat because a lot of critics of this work say, yes, there's a correlation between diversity and stock performance because companies that are profitable can hire the very best people, right? And that's going to be a more diverse group. But this study, they looked at diversity in a very broad way. So everything from gender diversity to racial diversity, to disability diversity, LGBTQ status, age, parental status, and they looked at how changes in diversity affect changes in company performance. And specifically, they were interested in innovation. And to boil down a very long study, in the end, they found that companies that had the greatest diversity produced, on average, 2 more products per year than companies with less diversity. That's huge. Like, how many products do companies produce per year in the first place, right? This isn't a huge number, so 2 more per year is really fantastic. And why this is, here's at least one reason. Some of you might remember this, are you bringing me a mic? A classic study by Solomon Asch on conformity. And so in this study, they sat 3 people together in a room, and they had to decide which line is the same length as line X. So can anyone tell which line you think it is? A, okay, most people say A. This isn't a visual illusion, okay? But the 3 people who were sitting there, they were actually all in on the study, so they were Confederates. And then there's one participant, the blurred person. And so the experimenter asks the simple question, says, which line is the same as line X? And the first person, we'll call him David, says, it's line C. And so what do? Like, you snicker, like, what is he answering? And then the second person, Steve, says, it's C. And now all of a sudden you're like, wait, John, what's the question here? Like, what exactly are they trying to get at? And then John says, it's C. And finally, when it gets to your turn, more than 50% of people will knowingly give the wrong answer just to conform. And I think we see this in business all the time, where people think, oh yeah, this is a great idea, because you don't want to be the one person in the room who raises a dissenting opinion. But what's really cool is someone redid this study in 2018, except rather than David, Steve, and John, they had a really diverse room of people. And what they found is when that group of people looked different from each other, the real participant was a lot less likely to conform. They thought, I don't know what's wrong with these 3 people, but they're obviously not like me and I'm right. And I think we see that in businesses as well. When you have a really diverse room of people, you're a lot more willing to play devil's advocate or something like that. And despite this, despite all of these great data, we see here in the UK, there are more people named David and Steve that lead FTSE 100 companies than women and ethnic minorities. That's a lot of David and Steves. Do you have any guess what percentage of the population is named David? At least in the US, it's about 2% of the population. And for us, I'm guessing it's quite similar here. Women are about 51% of the population. So that's pretty mind-blowing that there's more Steves and Davids than women. Why is this? I say it's unconscious bias. And so I'm going to give you my explanation of what unconscious bias looks like. I need some help from someone very loud. Maybe Rory, you have a loud voice. Would you read that sentence?
The rock star was unhappy with the amount of alcohol in the wine.
Okay, so here's your unconscious bias. If you stop for a minute, oh, thanks. And okay. That's okay. Okay, stop for a minute and just let an image come into your mind. Okay, get that image out of your mind. And now, the rock star was unhappy with the amount of alcohol, the problem. What do you see? You see, at least I'll tell you what I see. I see a man in leather pants dancing on a table. Is anyone else? Essentially, I see Mick Jagger. Is anyone else? Yeah. Steven Tyler? Quite possibly. Mick Jagger, who went to London School of Economics, unfortunately couldn't be here today for Nudgestock, but I'm sure he would have loved to be here. But we all see a quite similar image. And why is Mick Jagger unhappy? There's not enough alcohol, right? There's not enough alcohol at this party. Okay, for the next one, let an image pop into your mind. The nun was unhappy with the amount of alcohol at the party. Okay, how many people see a woman in leather pants dancing on a table? And why is she unhappy? There's too much alcohol at this party, right? Even though I was raised Catholic, and I can tell you it's the only religion that you drink in church, but nonetheless. These are unconscious biases. They're prototypes for what a nun looks like, what a rock star looks like, and they allow us to even infer motivations for people. Here's another one. After weighing all the circumstances, the CEO decided to terminate a few employees. Okay, how many people see a man sitting at a big wooden desk in a suit, and he's having to do layoffs in the organization, right? Does anyone see anything different? Okay. After weighing all the circumstances, the drug dealer decided to terminate a few employees. Maybe a slightly different image, right? And if you think, I'm guessing we all have the same image here, and how many CEOs and drug dealers don't actually tell me, do you know personally? Not a lot, right? I mean, I don't know a lot. But despite that, we all have these really strong images. So imagine how strong the prototype must be for someone who you actually know a lot of, like women or people of color or people in the LGBTQ community. You have much stronger prototypes for them. What about a basketball player? So actually, I was a little worried about this. Your prototype for a basketball player, because I know basketball is not really big here in the UK, right? But there are some Americans in the room, so you can help me out if no one knows. But if you think of a basketball player, who do you think of? Okay, they're tall. Do you have any names, specific basketball players? LeBron. Okay, that's good. Any others? Steph Curry. Michael Jordan. Everyone knows him, right? Essentially, 100% of people will say an African-American male. And you might not know this, being in the UK, but there are other basketball players that are not African-American men. But everyone thinks of an African-American male because African-American men in the United States are about 13% of the US population, but they're 74% of the NBA. So they're the prototypical basketball player. And why that's important is you don't just think of an African-American male when you think of a basketball player. You probably also think that African-American men are better basketball players. Because those tricky minds that we have can actually do that math. If you're 13% of the population, but 74% of the NBA, there must be something there, right? Do you think people thought of an African-American male basketball player in the US back in the 1950s? This is the 1953, 54, and 55 Minneapolis Lakers, that's in Minnesota. This is a very white team. The coach is named David. The captain's named Steve. That's not actually true. But probably not, right? No one had that prototype. And I put this up here just to say that our prototypes are based on what we see around us. And so as those things change, our prototypes can change quite quickly as well. So now if you apply this logic to CEOs or leaders, if you know that white men don't comprise 99% of the population of the UK, but they comprise 95% of the FTSE 100, don't you also think that white men are better CEOs? Oh, this is where everyone says no. Like, no, this is like, it's unfair, the system's rigged and stuff. But your mind actually puts those things together. And on some level, we all think, when you think of a CEO, you think of a white guy. This is true in the UK, it's true in the US. And so you think that white men make better CEOs. Now I have a little asterisk there because I have a disclaimer. I will say, if you stood up for 20 minutes and said the word white men 15 times, people really start to think you hate white men. But I have to say, here's my disclaimer, I actually love white men. Some of my best friends growing up were white men. My dad, white dude. This is my son, he's like a tiny little white dude. It's really, yeah, he's so cute, right? It's really nothing against white men. It's about equality, fairness, but also about increasing innovation and company performance. So I think we can do something better, and that is we can overcome unconscious bias through the ABCs of breaking bias, and I'm going to take you through these. Just for a second, if you would, don't think of a white bear. Try really hard. Okay, did anyone think of a white bear? Probably everyone thinks of a white bear. This is called ironic thought suppression, a finding by Dan Wegner that essentially says the human mind is incapable of not thinking about something. You will experience this as very true if you think about the last time you talked to someone who had food in their teeth. Because if you chose not to tell them about the food, which is very bad, you keep looking at the food in their teeth. And you can't even listen to what they're saying because you're like, what is that? Broccoli, sesame seed? And you keep looking at it. And the same thing is true with diversity. I think we've gotten past this in most organizations, but I'm racial blind, I'm color blind, I'm gender blind too. That's amazing, right? I don't care if you're black, white, green, or red. I just want the best performer. And if you come into every day in an organization with that kind of attitude, pretending that you don't care, you're going to focus on race and gender all the more. And in fact, it's going to affect your behavior to a greater extent. So the A in the ABCs of breaking bias is just admit it. We all have these biases. You do too, but we can do better. And one way to do better is to find ways to block it. So systems that you can create in your company that don't allow you to make biased decisions. As an example of this, I really like blinding. It just essentially means taking the name off of a resume. So you really don't know their race, gender, or anything about them. And you actually make the decision on hiring the best person for the job. And I've been working with the Hubble Space Telescope in the US for the last several years on trying to create blind applications to use Hubble. So Hubble is like a big telescope that astrophysicists use to do their research. And if you can't get access to Hubble, it's really difficult to do your research. You can try NASA or something, the European Space Administration. And so every year at Hubble, women perform a lot worse than men. And this is taking into account the fact that a lot less or fewer women apply than men, but their success rate is this red line. They are a lot less likely to get access to Hubble. So around here, we decided to take the names off the applications in several degrees. So first, we just took it off the first page, and then we took it off the first letter of your name. It just said like S. Johnson. And then we further blinded it. And then in this last year, we just told everyone, you cannot put your name on your application. You can't refer to yourself in any way. We don't want to know who you are. And so this is about 16 years of data. And in the 17th year of data, the number of women outperformed the number of men who got access to Hubble. This is a 0.7% increase, which is so far from statistically significant, it's practically zero. But that's the point. It's not that I think if we just made everything fair, women would rule the world and people of color would take over everything. I think it's just a lot more equal than we imagine. And if we could block the unconscious bias, we could make a lot better decisions. Who knows what we're going to find out there, right? With all these women astrophysicists. I'm thinking aliens, something good. The C in the ABCs is count it. And we've talked about data and numbers a lot. And this comes into play in relation to diversity as well. Organizations that set specific metrics and goals around diversity actually have much greater success at increasing your diversity. We want to do better is a really hard thing to assess. Are we doing better? Are we doing worse? We don't even measure it, right? Most companies don't even want to keep track of it. So organizations like Starbucks, you've probably heard of Medtronic, it's a medical device company, Accenture have set really specific targets for what they want to achieve when it comes to diversity and inclusion. The S in the ABCs of breaking bias is support it. And that means me supporting it and all of you supporting it, and doing so in a really verbal and vocal way, letting people know that you believe in diversity and inclusion. I can tell you lessons of many CEOs I interviewed for this research project, CEOs of Starbucks, Gap, which now I feel bad because they're not doing very well, Salesforce, and they all had these really great insights around diversity. But I can sum at least one of them up in a really simple study that I did looking at the effect of promoting diversity on diverse people, so women and people of color. And what we found is that women and people of color, when they promote diversity, are actually viewed negatively. So when their subordinates say, yes, this is someone who respects differences, values people from different backgrounds, their supervisors rated them as less competent. And at the same time, if they chose to hire someone who was another woman or person of color, they were viewed negatively. On the flip side, when their male counterparts did the same thing, it actually had no effect. It wasn't really positive, it wasn't negative, it was just no difference. And so when it comes to supporting diversity, I would say it's so important that it's not just a women issue and a people of color issue, it's an all of us issue, because all of our stock prices go up when we have diversity. And so we should all be working to increase diversity and inclusion. Thank you.